Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. That's the truth. When the call came in about my grandfather's will reading, no one from my family even bothered to inform me. I found out the same way I always found things out growing up, by accident, through whispers that weren't meant for me. My cousin, Daniel, posted a picture outside the law firm. Expensive suit, smug smile. Caption said, "Big day, legacy continues." Legacy. That word always stung, because in our family, legacy didn't include people like me. I was the quiet one, the outsider, the mistake no one ever said out loud, but everyone treated like it was obvious. My mother had me young, out of wedlock, and married into the family later. That alone was enough for them to always see me as less. Less important, less worthy, less theirs. Especially my grandfather, or at least that's what I believed. He was a billionaire, self-made, cold, calculated, a man who built empires and expected perfection from everyone around him. My uncles worshipped him, my cousins feared him, and me? He barely acknowledged I existed. I can count on one hand how many full conversations we ever had. So when I saw that picture, something in me just snapped. Not anger, not even sadness, just this quiet, tired voice inside me that said, "You deserve to see this, even if they don't want you there." So I went. I didn't dress like them. No designer suit, no polished image, just a simple outfit, something clean, respectful. I didn't want attention. I just wanted closure. The law firm building was exactly what you'd expect. Glass, steel, cold. Like the kind of place where emotions weren't welcome. And when I walked in, I felt it immediately. Every eye turned. My aunt's lips tightened. My uncle leaned over and whispered something to his wife. Daniel actually laughed under his breath. No one said hello. No one asked why I was there. But no one told me to leave either, because deep down, they all knew I had a right to be there, even if they hated it. I took a seat in the far corner, quiet, invisible, just like always. The lawyer walked in a few minutes later, older man, calm presence, the kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud to control a room. He introduced himself, gave the usual formalities, then began. And that's when I realized something strange. The air felt tense, not sad, not grieving, tense, like everyone in that room was waiting for something specific, something important. Of course they were. $3.8 billion doesn't just disappear quietly. It gets divided, fought over, expected. And everyone there expected something. Except me. I expected nothing, which is probably why I was the only one not holding my breath when he started reading. He went through the usual things first: donations to charities, business allocations, trusts for ongoing ventures. Then came the family. My oldest uncle, he got properties, multiple, commercial and residential. My aunt, stocks, assets, and a generous monthly trust. Daniel, cash, a lot of it, plus partial ownership in one of the companies. One by one, they got exactly what they expected. No surprises, just confirmation. I remember watching their faces, relief, satisfaction, validation, like this was never in question, like the world was simply falling into place the way it was always meant to. And the entire time, I sat there completely detached. I didn't even think my name would come up. Why would it? I wasn't part of their legacy. At least, that's what I believed, until the lawyer paused. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the document, then looked up and said, "My name." For a second, I thought I imagined it. The room went quiet, like unnaturally quiet. Even the air felt different. My aunt frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" The lawyer didn't react. He just repeated it, slowly, clearly, "My name." And suddenly, every single person in that room turned to look at me. Not with curiosity, not even confusion, but something else, something sharper, like I had just become a problem. My heart started pounding. I didn't understand what was happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to me. The lawyer continued, and I swear, every word felt heavier than the last. "To my grandchild, who was often overlooked but never unseen." I froze. My chest tightened. Overlooked but never unseen? That didn't make sense. That wasn't the man I knew or thought I knew. "To the one who showed kindness without expectation, who carried strength in silence, and who reminded me in my final years what truly matters." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a mention. This was personal, deeply personal. And then came the line that changed everything. "To my remaining estate, valued at approximately $3.8 billion. The room leaned forward. Everyone did, because they assumed, like always, this was just another division, another allocation, another predictable outcome. Until the lawyer finished the sentence. "To them." Silence. Complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It felt like time just stopped. I remember blinking, trying to process what I just heard, trying to convince myself I misunderstood, because there was no way, no possible way, that he meant me. But the lawyer looked directly at me, not past me, not around me, at me, and gave a small, respectful nod, as if to confirm, "Yes, it's you." That's when everything broke. My aunt stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's not possible." My uncle shook his head. "There has to be a mistake." Daniel laughed again, but this time it wasn't confident. It was nervous. "This is some kind of joke, right?" But the lawyer remained calm, composed, unshaken. "There is no mistake." And just like that, the entire room turned against me. I could feel it, the shift, the resentment, the disbelief twisting into something darker. Because in their eyes, I hadn't just received an inheritance, I had taken something that belonged to them, something they believed was theirs by right, by blood, by expectation, and I, the forgotten one, had just been handed it all. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because deep down, I was just as shocked as they were. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't even the biggest surprise, because there was one more thing, one thing my grandfather left behind, just for me, a message, a truth, a secret so powerful it would destroy everything they thought they knew about our family, and about him, and about me. I just didn't know it yet, but I was about to. The silence didn't last long. It shattered. Voices rose all at once, sharp, angry, disbelieving. My aunt demanded clarification. My uncle accused the lawyer of incompetence. And Daniel, he just stared at me like I had personally robbed him. I stayed seated, not because I was calm, but because my body wouldn't move. $3.8 billion. It didn't feel real. It didn't even feel possible. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's life, someone else's story. And I was waiting for someone to tap my shoulder and say, "Wrong person." But no one did. Instead, the lawyer calmly raised his hand, not aggressively, not loudly, just enough to remind everyone that he was still in control of the room. "Please," he said, his voice steady, "there is more to read." That stopped them. Not because they respected him, but because they were desperate. Desperate for something that would undo what they just heard. A clause, a condition, a loophole, anything. I could feel their eyes on me, like I had suddenly become something foreign, something threatening. The lawyer looked down again, turning a page slowly, deliberately. "This inheritance," he continued, "includes all liquid assets, corporate shares, international holdings, and private estates not previously assigned." My uncle let out a quiet curse under his breath, because that wasn't just money. That was power. That was control. That was everything my grandfather had built over a lifetime, handed to someone they spent years pretending didn't exist. But the lawyer wasn't finished. "There are conditions." That word changed everything. The tension shifted instantly. My aunt sat back down, a small, hopeful smile creeping onto her face. "Of course there are. There have to be." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, like a man watching his lifeline return. Even I felt it, a strange mix of relief and fear, because conditions meant this could still be taken away. The lawyer continued, "The beneficiary must personally review and sign all transitional documents within 30 days. That sounded normal, almost too normal. My uncle scoffed. "That's standard. That's nothing." But the lawyer didn't react. He simply kept reading. "They must also reside in the primary estate for a minimum of 6 consecutive months." Now that got a reaction. My aunt frowned. "Reside? You mean live there?" "Yes." Daniel laughed softly. "That old place? No one's lived there in years." I didn't say anything. I'd only been there once, as a child, a massive estate on the outskirts of the city, isolated, quiet, the kind of place that felt more like a museum than a home. But again, the lawyer wasn't done. And finally, the room leaned in again, because they could feel it. The real condition, the one that mattered. The beneficiary must review the personal archive left behind and follow the instructions contained within. That was it. No dramatic clause, no impossible requirement, just instructions. My uncle shook his head. "That's it? That's the big condition?" My aunt almost looked disappointed. But Daniel, he was watching me, carefully, like he was trying to figure something out. "Wait," he said slowly, "what kind of instructions?" The lawyer paused. For the first time, he hesitated. And that hesitation, it changed everything. Because suddenly, this didn't feel simple anymore. "They are personal in nature," he said carefully, "left exclusively for the beneficiary." That didn't sit well with anyone, especially my family. "Exclusive? We have a right to know." "You do not," the lawyer interrupted, still calm but firmer now. "These instructions were left privately, and legally they are binding only to the individual named." That's when the room turned again. Not loud this time, not explosive, but colder, sharper. Because now, it wasn't just about the money. It was about what they didn't know. And in a family built on control, that was dangerous. The meeting ended shortly after that, not because everything was resolved, but because there was nothing more to argue. Legally, it was done. The papers would be prepared, the transfer process would begin, and I, somehow, was at the center of it all. As people started leaving, no one came to congratulate me. Of course not. That would have required kindness. Instead, they passed by me like I wasn't even human, or worse, like I was something they didn't recognize anymore, something they didn't trust. My aunt stopped in front of me briefly, her expression tight, controlled. You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've stepped into." Then she walked away. My uncle didn't even look at me. Daniel was the last one. He lingered, studied me, then smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that hides something. "You always were lucky," he said. "Let's see how long that lasts." And then he left. Just like that, I was alone. Alone in a room that had just handed me everything and taken something I couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or the illusion of it. The lawyer approached me slowly. Up close, he seemed different, less formal, more human. "You handled that well," he said. I let out a small, shaky breath. "I didn't handle anything. I'm still trying to understand what just happened." He nodded. "That's fair." There was a brief pause before he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single item, a sealed envelope. Thick, heavy, my name written on the front, in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly. My grandfather's. My chest tightened. "This," the lawyer said gently, holding it out to me, "is part of the personal archive." I stared at it, didn't take it right away, because suddenly this felt bigger than the money, bigger than the estate. This felt like answers, answers I didn't even know I needed. "When am I supposed to read it?" The lawyer's expression softened slightly. "When you're ready." That wasn't the answer I expected, but somehow it felt right. I took the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been. Or maybe it just felt that way. "Your grandfather," the lawyer added gently, "was not the man most people believed him to be." I looked up at him. "What does that mean?" He gave a small, almost sad smile. "I think he wanted you to find that out for yourself." And with that, he left, leaving me standing there, holding a letter from a man I thought I understood, but clearly didn't. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. Instead, I walked out of the building, into the noise of the city, into a world that suddenly felt completely different. The same streets, the same sky, but nothing felt the same, because I wasn't the same. I got into my car and just sat there for a while, the envelope resting in my hands, my name staring back at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I never felt before when it came to my grandfather. Not fear, not distance, but curiosity, and something else, something quieter, something deeper, connection. I took a deep breath. Then slowly, carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside there was a letter and a key, old, heavy, unfamiliar. My fingers tightened around it as I unfolded the letter, and the moment I read the first line, everything I thought I knew started to fall apart. The paper felt fragile in my hands, not because it was old, but because it carried something I wasn't ready to face. I stared at the first line longer than I should have, not reading it, just absorbing it, because it didn't begin the way I expected. There was no formality, no cold, distant tone, no authority, just 6 simple words that hit harder than anything else could have. "I know I failed you." My throat tightened instantly. I blinked, reading it again, slower this time. "I know I failed you. Not if, not perhaps, not in some ways. No, I know." That certainty, it shook something deep inside me, because for my entire life, I thought he didn't see me, didn't notice, didn't care. But this meant he did. He always did. I swallowed hard and kept reading. "You deserved a grandfather who stood beside you, not one who watched from a distance. And for that, I carry regret that no amount of time will erase." My vision blurred slightly. I didn't even realize I had started gripping the paper tighter. He noticed. All those years, all those moments I thought didn't matter. He noticed, but he did nothing. That thought hurt more than anything. I kept going. There are truths about this family that were buried long before you were born, truths I chose to protect at the cost of losing you. My breath caught. Buried truths? Protect? Lose me? What did that even mean? The words felt heavy, like they carried weight far beyond what I could understand in that moment. You were never an accident. You were never less. And you were never outside this family, no matter how hard others tried to make you feel that way. A tear slipped down before I could stop it, because that sentence, that one sentence, it healed something I didn't even know was still broken. All those years of feeling like I didn't belong, like I was a mistake, like I had to earn a place that was never really mine. And here he was, telling me the opposite. Too late, but still, it mattered. I wiped my face quickly and continued. The key enclosed will take you to a place no one else knows about. Not your uncles, not your aunts, not even Daniel. My fingers tightened around the small, cold piece of metal. So this wasn't just symbolic. It was literal. A place. A secret place. There you will find the archive, documents, recordings, and truths that were never meant to be seen until now. My heart started beating faster because suddenly this didn't feel like a letter. It felt like a warning, or maybe an invitation. I have left everything to you, not because of what you were owed, but because of who you chose to be in a family that gave you no reason to stay kind. I closed my eyes for a second. That line, it broke something open inside me, because I had spent so many years wondering if being kind was just weakness, if staying quiet made me invisible, if choosing not to fight back made me less. And here he was, saying that was the very reason he chose me. You will be tested, the letter continued, not by the world, but by those who believe this was theirs. My mind flashed back to their faces, the anger, the disbelief, the resentment. This wasn't over, not even close. And when that happens, you must decide what kind of person you will be when you finally have the power they never allowed you to hold. Power. That word felt different now. He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about something deeper, something harder, the kind of power that changes people or reveals who they really are. The letter slowed after that, the sentences shorter, more personal. I am proud of you. I froze, because in my entire life, I had never heard those words from him. Not once, not even close. I always was. That did it. I couldn't hold it back anymore. The tears came quietly, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Because those words, they came too late, and yet they were exactly what I needed. At the very bottom of the page, there was one final line, short, simple, and somehow heavier than everything else. Now it's time for you to see the truth. I lowered the letter slowly. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not completely, but from something else, anticipation. Because whatever this truth was, it was big enough for him to build an entire secret around it, big enough to leave me everything, big enough to risk tearing this family apart. I looked down at the key again. Old metal, worn edges. This wasn't decorative. This was used, hidden, protected, and now it was mine. I leaned back in the car seat, staring out at nothing, trying to piece it all together. But nothing fit, nothing made sense yet, and maybe that was the point, because this wasn't something I was supposed to understand all at once. This was something I had to uncover, step by step, truth by truth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, not because I was done with it, but because I knew I'd read it again, probably more times than I could count. Then I picked up the key, turned it slightly between my fingers, and made a decision. I wasn't going to wait. Whatever answers were waiting for me, I needed them now, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to my family. I was moving ahead of them. I started the car. The engine hummed to life, and for a brief moment, I hesitated because I knew something. Deep down, the moment I used that key, there would be no going back, no pretending, no staying on the outside of things. I would be stepping directly into whatever my grandfather had been hiding all these years. And based on everything I had just read, it wasn't going to be simple or easy or safe. But I didn't stop. I couldn't, because after a lifetime of being kept in the dark, I was finally being given a chance to see, and I wasn't going to waste it. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, took one last breath, and drove straight toward the one place that held the truth, the estate, and whatever waited beneath it. The drive to the estate felt longer than I remembered, not because of distance, but because of what it meant this time. The last time I had been there, I was a child. I barely understood where I was, just that everything felt too big, too quiet, too unwelcoming. It wasn't a place children laughed in. It was a place where voices echoed and footsteps mattered. Now, as the gates came into view, that same feeling crept back in, but deeper, heavier, because this time I knew there was something hidden there, something meant only for me. The gates were already open. That stopped me. I slowed the car instinctively, my eyes narrowing slightly as I passed through. No guard, no security stopping me, no questions. It was as if I had been expected, or maybe everything had already been arranged. The driveway stretched long and quiet, lined with trees that hadn't been touched in years. The estate itself stood at the end like something frozen in time, still grand, still imposing. But now there was something else. Stillness. Not peaceful stillness, the kind that feels like it's waiting. I parked near the front entrance and just sat there for a moment, my hands still on the wheel. This was it. Whatever answers existed, they were inside. I stepped out slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my feet louder than it should have been. Every sound felt amplified, like the estate itself was listening. The front doors were locked. Of course they were. I tried the handle anyway, just in case. Nothing. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key from the envelope. But the moment I looked at it again, something didn't feel right. This key wasn't for the front door. It was too old, too specific. The design didn't match anything modern, which meant the letter wasn't leading me inside the obvious way. I stepped back, scanning the building. Windows, side entrances, service doors. Then something clicked in my memory, a faint image from years ago. I didn't even know why it came to me, but it did. The back of the estate. There had been a separate structure, smaller, almost forgotten. I remembered wandering near it once before being pulled away. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, it felt like everything. I walked around the side of the house, the air feeling cooler the further I went. The silence followed me, heavy and constant. And then I saw it, the structure, still there, older than the rest of the estate, Stone walls, slightly worn, covered in creeping vines. A single wooden door at the front. No windows, no markings. Just there, waiting. My heart started beating faster as I approached it. This was it. It had to be. I pulled out the key again, my fingers tightening slightly around it. For a brief second, I hesitated. Because once I opened this door, everything would change. But then I remembered his words. Now it's time for you to see the truth. So I stepped forward, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. The click echoed louder than it should have. The door creaked open slowly, like it hadn't been touched in years. A cool, stale air drifted out. I stepped inside. Dark. Completely dark. I reached along the wall instinctively, my fingers brushing against old stone until I found a switch. I pressed it. Soft light flickered on. And what I saw wasn't what I expected. At all. It wasn't a storage room. It wasn't an archive in the traditional sense. It was a study, but not just any study. It felt personal, deeply personal. Shelves lined the walls, filled with neatly organized boxes, documents, and files. A large desk sat in the center, untouched, almost like someone had just stepped away. There were photographs, too, but not the kind displayed in the main house. These were different, hidden, private. I walked in slowly, my footsteps softer now, careful, like I didn't want to disturb something or someone. I moved toward the desk first. There was another envelope sitting there, this one already opened. Inside, a single note. Short, direct. You came. My chest tightened. Not if you're reading this, not in case you find this. No. You came. Like he knew. Like he was certain I would follow this path. I looked around the room again, my eyes scanning more carefully now. This wasn't random. Everything here had been placed intentionally, organized, preserved. For me. I reached for one of the boxes on the shelf, my fingers brushing against the label. Dates. Names. Records. Some of them went back decades. I pulled one down slowly and opened it. Inside were documents. Old ones. Legal papers, financial records. But as I flipped through them, something felt off. These weren't just business transactions. They were transfers. Hidden transfers. Money moving in ways that didn't appear in official records. My stomach tightened. Why would he hide this? I set the papers down carefully and moved to another box. This one contained photographs. I picked one up and froze because I recognized the person in it. My mother. But she looked younger, much younger, standing next to... I stopped breathing because standing next to her was my grandfather. But not the man I knew, not the cold, distant figure from family gatherings. This version of him was smiling, genuinely smiling, his hand resting on her shoulder in a way that felt protective, familiar, close, too close. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up another photograph, then another, each one telling the same story. Moments I had never seen, a relationship I didn't know existed. And then I saw it. One photograph that didn't match the others. It wasn't just my mother and him. It was my mother holding a baby. My heart dropped because I knew that photo. I had seen it before. It used to sit in a drawer back home, faded, almost forgotten. But this version was clearer, preserved. And my grandfather was standing right beside her, looking down at the baby with something I had never seen in his eyes before. Not pride, not expectation, something softer, something undeniable. My chest tightened painfully because there was only one question left, one question that suddenly felt too big to ignore. Why was he there? Why was he part of that moment? My breathing slowed as the realization started to creep in. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. This wasn't just a hidden archive. This was something else, something much deeper, something that had been kept from me my entire life. And as I stood there, holding that photograph, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. The truth my grandfather wanted me to see wasn't about money, wasn't about power. It was about me. And whatever I was about to uncover next was going to change everything. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that photograph. Time felt irrelevant, like everything outside that room had paused just long enough for me to understand what I was looking at. But the truth was, I didn't fully understand it yet. Not completely. I just felt it. That quiet, sinking feeling in your chest when something doesn't add up, but you know, deep down, it will. Eventually. And when it does, it won't be small. I placed the photograph back down carefully, like it might break if I handled it wrong. But my hands were already shaking, because now I wasn't just curious. I was afraid. Not of the money, not of my family, but of the truth itself. Because whatever had been hidden here, it was personal, and it was connected to me in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I took a slow breath and forced myself to keep moving. There had to be more. There always is. Truth like this doesn't sit quietly in one place. It spreads. It leaves traces. It builds a story, piece by piece. And I needed the full story. I turned back to the desk and noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small device. Old, but not ancient. A recorder. Next to it, a stack of labeled tapes. My heart skipped. Recordings. Of course. If he wanted me to understand something, truly understand it, he wouldn't just leave documents. He'd leave his voice. I hesitated again, because hearing him, that was different. Reading words is one thing, but hearing someone's voice, their pauses, their tone, the emotion they couldn't hide, that makes it real. Too real. But I didn't stop. I picked up the first tape. The label was simple. Start here. Of course it was. I let out a quiet breath I didn't realize I was holding and inserted the tape into the recorder. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a soft click. Static. And then, his voice. Older than I remembered. Weaker, but unmistakably his. If you're hearing this, then you found it. I froze. Every muscle in my body went still, because suddenly he wasn't gone. Not in that moment. He was right there, speaking directly to me. I don't know how long it took you, or what you had to go through to get here. But if you're listening, it means you chose to see." His voice paused slightly, like he was gathering strength. "That matters more than you realize." I swallowed hard, my eyes fixed on the recorder like it might disappear if I looked away. "There are things I need to tell you, things I should have told you a long time ago." Another pause, longer this time, and when he spoke again, his voice changed, softer, heavier. "You've spent your life believing you were an outsider in this family." My chest tightened instantly, because that wasn't an assumption, that was a fact, or at least it had always felt like one. That belief was not your fault. My fingers curled slightly against the edge of the desk. It was mine. The words hit harder than I expected, because again, there was no hesitation, no deflection, just truth. I allowed a lie to exist because I thought I was protecting something. A lie. The word echoed in my mind. What lie? What could possibly be big enough to shape my entire life like that? I told myself it was necessary, that keeping certain things buried would keep the family stable, keep the business intact. His voice tightened slightly. "But all it really did was hurt you." I closed my eyes briefly, because hearing him say it like that, it made everything real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "I watched you grow up from a distance, every achievement, every moment you stood on your own when no one stood with you." My throat burned. "You think I didn't see that?" A small, almost broken breath came through the recording. "I saw everything." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Because all those years, all those moments I thought I was invisible, I wasn't. He was there. He just chose not to step forward, and that hurt. But it also meant something else. "You were never outside this family." His voice steadier now. "You were at the center of it." My eyes snapped open. My heart started racing again, because that sentence, that changed everything. At the center? What did that even mean? Nothing about my life had ever felt like the center of anything. "I'm going to tell you something now, and when you hear it, nothing will feel the same." The room felt colder somehow, like the air itself was bracing for what was coming next. "I need you to listen carefully." I leaned closer without realizing it, like proximity would somehow prepare me. "It's about your mother." My chest tightened instantly, because whatever this was, it started with her, and I already knew from those photographs that there was something there, something hidden, something important. She didn't just marry into this family. My pulse quickened. Every instinct in my body told me this was it, the truth, the one that everything had been building toward, the one that would explain why I was here, why he chose me, why everything felt so connected. She was part of it long before that. I frowned slightly. That didn't make sense. Not yet. But I stayed silent, listened, waited. "And you," his voice softened again, almost to a whisper, "are not who they think you are." The words hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. I felt my breath slow, my mind trying to catch up, trying to understand what he meant. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not until he said it. Not until the truth was spoken clearly, fully. And then he did. "You are my grandchild." A pause, just long enough to feel it, but not in the way they believe. My heart slammed against my chest, because suddenly Everything was pointing in one direction, one possibility, one truth that felt too big to even think about. And yet, I couldn't stop it, couldn't avoid it, because deep down, I already knew, or at least, I was starting to. The recording crackled slightly as his voice continued, and I braced myself, because whatever came next was going to change my life forever. My hands were gripping the edge of the desk so tightly, my knuckles had turned pale. I didn't even notice. All I could focus on was his voice and the space between his words, because in that silence, everything was building. Everything was pointing towards something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear, but I couldn't stop now. I wouldn't. The recorder hummed softly before he spoke again, slower this time, carefully, like he understood exactly how much weight each word carried. You are my grandchild. A pause, but not in the way they believe. My chest rose and fell, shallow and uneven, because there were only so many ways that sentence could end, only so many truths it could be hiding, and none of them were small. I let them believe a version of the truth that was convenient. Convenient. That word felt wrong, too light for something that had shaped my entire life. I told them your mother married into this family, that you came later, that your place here was secondary. My jaw tightened. Secondary. That's exactly how they treated me, like I came after everything that mattered, like I was added on, not born into it. But that was never the truth. The air felt thinner, harder to breathe, because now there was no turning away from it, no softening what was coming next. The truth is, his voice dropped, not weaker, just heavier. Your mother was my daughter. Everything stopped. Not slowed, not blurred, stopped. My mind went completely blank, like it refused to process what I had just heard, because that didn't make sense. That couldn't be right. If my mother was his daughter, then no. No, that meant I kept her hidden. The words cut through the silence like something sharp, from everyone. My heart was racing now, loud, uncontrollable, because suddenly everything was shifting. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, was breaking apart. She wasn't born into the life you saw. She came before it, before the money, before the name meant anything. I swallowed hard, trying to keep up, trying to understand. She was my first child. The weight of that sentence hit differently. First, not just another child, the first. She was born at a time when I had nothing, when I was still building everything from the ground up. His voice softened again, filled with something I had never associated with him before. Regret. I made choices back then, choices I thought were necessary. A bitter breath escaped through the speaker. I told myself I was protecting her. But the way he said it didn't sound like protection. It sounded like loss. I kept her existence quiet, separate, away from the life I was creating, because I believed it would be safer for her. Safer. My chest tightened, because if that was true, then everything that came after, everything my family believed, was built on a lie. She grew up outside the spotlight, outside the expectations, and for a while I convinced myself it was the right decision. A pause, longer this time, heavier. But when I finally brought her back into my life, into the family, His voice cracked slightly. It was already too late. I felt something sink deep in my chest because I knew what too late meant. I had lived it. They didn't accept her. Of course they didn't. That part didn't surprise me, not after everything I had experienced. They didn't fit their image of what this family was supposed to be. My fingers curled tighter because that sounded familiar, too familiar. And when you were born, my breath caught again. They saw you the same way. I closed my eyes slowly because suddenly every look, every whisper, every moment I felt like I didn't belong, it made sense. Not because I was an outsider, but because they were trying to make me one. You weren't the mistake, he said quietly. They were. A tear slipped down my cheek again, but I didn't move, didn't wipe it away because I couldn't. Not yet. He continued. I should have told the truth then. I should have stood up, made it clear who you were, where you came from. Another pause, filled with something heavier than before. But I didn't. The words fell flat, not defensive, not justified, just real. I chose silence. That hit harder than anything else, because silence, that's what I remembered most. Not cruelty, not anger, silence. I told myself I was protecting the family, protecting the business, protecting everything I had built. His voice hardened slightly, but all I really did was protect a lie. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in, because that lie, it wasn't just something they believed, it was something I lived every single day. And you paid the price for it. I let out a slow, shaky breath, because there it was, the truth, not hidden, not softened, just laid out exactly as it was. You grew up thinking you didn't belong, when in reality, his voice steadied, stronger now. You were the one who belonged the most. My chest tightened painfully because that sentence, it changed everything, everything. All those years of feeling like I was on the outside, and the truth was, I was never outside at all. I was just hidden, pushed aside, rewritten into something easier for them to accept. The recording went quiet for a moment, just static, but I didn't move because I knew there was more. There always was, and whatever came next was going to explain why he chose me, why he left everything to me, why he waited until now to tell the truth. The static faded slightly, and then his voice returned, softer but clearer than ever. And that is why everything I built now belongs to you. I exhaled slowly, because now I understood. Not just the money, not just the inheritance, but the reason behind it. This wasn't generosity. This wasn't random. This was correction, a final attempt to fix something that had been broken for too long. But even then, one question still lingered in my mind. If he knew all of this, if he regretted it so deeply, why wait? Why now? Why not tell the truth sooner? As if he could hear that question, the recording continued, and I braced myself because I knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. I didn't leave the room right away. I couldn't. Not after everything I had just heard, not after everything I had just learned. Instead, I stood there in that quiet space, surrounded by pieces of a life I never knew existed, and tried to steady myself. because the truth changes you, not all at once, not in some dramatic shift, but slowly, deeply, like something settling into your bones. And I could feel it happening. The way I saw myself, my family, even my grandfather, it was all different now. But one thing was clear. He was right. They were going to come, and I didn't have much time before they did. I moved quickly after that, not rushed, but focused, intentional, because if there was anything else in this archive that could help me understand the full picture, I needed to find it now, before things got complicated, before they tried to take control of the situation. I went through more of the boxes, scanning documents, piecing together fragments of a story that had been hidden for decades, and what I found only made things clearer and heavier. There were legal drafts, unsigned declarations naming my mother as his firstborn, not public, not filed, just prepared. There were financial records showing that he had been supporting her quietly for years, separate accounts, hidden trusts. He never abandoned her. He just never claimed her. And then there were letters, dozens of them, all written in his handwriting, all addressed to her, but none of them sent. I picked one up, carefully unfolded it, and read, "I should have brought you into the light when I had the chance." I stopped there, because I didn't need to read the rest to understand. He had spent years trying to say something he never had the courage to act on, and now all of it had been left behind for me to find. I placed the letter back gently, my chest tight, because the more I saw, the more I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about her, too. My mother. Everything she went through, everything she never talked about, it suddenly made sense. Why she stayed quiet. Why she never defended herself when the family made her feel small. Why she never corrected them. Because she knew the truth, and she carried it alone. For years. That thought stayed with me as I stepped back from the shelves, because suddenly, this wasn't just about what I would do next. It was about what she had already endured, and what she deserved now. A slow breath left my chest as I looked around one last time. I had enough, more than enough. The truth was clear. Now it was just a matter of what I was going to do with it. I turned off the light, stepped out of the room, locked the door behind me, and walked back toward the main house. The air outside felt different, sharper, like the calm before something inevitable. I didn't rush, because there was no point. They were already on their way. I could feel it. And I was right. By the time I reached the front of the estate, they were there. 3 cars, parked in a line, engines still warm. Of course, they didn't wait. They never would. I stopped for a moment, standing just a few steps away from the entrance, watching, preparing, because once I walked through those doors, there would be no going back, no pretending, no avoiding what was coming. I stepped inside, and immediately I felt it, the tension, thick, unspoken, waiting. They were all there, my aunt, my uncle, Daniel, even a few extended family members who suddenly decided they belonged in this conversation. Funny how that works. The moment money's involved, people appear. No one spoke at first. They just looked at me, studied me, like they were trying to figure out who I was now, or maybe what I had become. I walked further in, calm, steady, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I wasn't going to let them see it. Not anymore. My aunt was the first to speak. Of course she was. "You went somewhere," she said, her voice controlled but sharp. "Where?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. "I was on the property," I said simply. That wasn't enough for her. Of course it wasn't. "Doing what?" she pressed. There it was, the demand, the entitlement, like she had a right to question me, to control the situation. But things were different now. "I don't think that's your concern," I replied calmly. The room shifted instantly. You could feel it, the change in power, subtle but undeniable. My uncle stepped forward slightly, his expression tight. "Everything here is our concern." I met his gaze, held it. "No," I said quietly, "it's not." That hit harder than if I had raised my voice, because they weren't used to it. They weren't used to me pushing back. Daniel let out a quiet laugh. "There it is," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Money changes people fast." I didn't react, because this wasn't about money. Not anymore. "You think you can just walk in here and act like you own everything?" he continued. I tilted my head slightly. "Think." A small pause. Then I looked around the room, at all of them. "I don't think," I said. "I know." Silence. Sharp. Immediate. Because that wasn't arrogance. It was fact. And they hated it. My aunt stepped closer now, her voice lower, more dangerous. "You don't understand what you've stepped into." There it was again, that warning, that threat wrapped in concern. But this time, it didn't land the same way. "Actually," I said calmly, "I understand more than you think." That caught their attention, every single one of them, because suddenly, this wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was about something else, something they didn't know, something they couldn't control. And they felt it. I could see it in their eyes. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, less confident now, more cautious. "What does that mean?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment, the choice he talked about, weapon or foundation. I could end it right here, drop the truth, watch everything fall apart. Or I could do something else, something they would never expect. I took a slow breath, looked at each of them one more time, and made my decision. I let the silence stretch just a little longer, not to intimidate them, not to make a point, but because I needed that moment to be sure of my choice. Because once I spoke, there was no taking it back, no undoing it, and more importantly, no controlling what came after. I looked at Daniel first, then my aunt, then my uncle, one by one, the same people who had spent years deciding who I was without ever asking. And for the first time, I realized something simple. They didn't actually know me, not really. They knew the version of me they were comfortable with, the quiet one, the one who didn't argue, the one who stayed in the background. But that version, it didn't exist anymore. "I found something," I said finally, my voice steady, calm, every word deliberate. That was enough to shift the room again, because now they were listening, really listening. "What kind of something?" my uncle asked, his tone sharp. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked further into the room, setting my keys down on the table like this was any normal day, like I belonged there. Because now I did. "Something that explains why things happened the way they did," I said. My aunt's eyes narrowed. "What things?" I met her gaze. The way you treated my mother, I said quietly. That landed hard, because that wasn't where they expected this to go, not even close. This isn't about that, she snapped quickly. Don't try to twist it is, I interrupted. Not loud, but firm, enough to stop her. Because for once, I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. Everything about this is about that, I continued. You just didn't know it. Now they were paying attention, not just out of anger, but curiosity, the dangerous kind. Daniel crossed his arms, watching me carefully. You're talking like you know something we don't. I held his gaze. I do. The room went still again, because that was the confirmation they didn't want, but couldn't ignore. My uncle stepped closer, his expression hardening. Then say it. There it was, the demand, the expectation, the belief that I would just hand it over, like I always had. But I didn't. Not yet. Because this moment, it mattered, more than anything else. I took a slow breath, let it out, and then I said the one thing that shifted everything. You were wrong about us, I said steadily. Confusion flickered across their faces instantly. About who we are, I added. My aunt frowned. What is that supposed to mean? I didn't break eye contact. It means my mother didn't marry into this family. A pause. Just long enough for the words to settle. She was always part of it. That hit differently. Not explosive, not immediate, but unsettling, because it didn't fit their version of reality. That's not true, my uncle said quickly, too quickly, like he needed to shut it down before it went any further. But I didn't stop. Not just part of it, I continued. She came before it. Now the confusion was turning into something else, something sharper. Suspicion. Daniel uncrossed his arms slowly. What are you saying? I looked at him, really looked at him, because out of all of them, he was the one starting to piece it together. And I could see it, in his eyes, in the way his expression shifted. You already feel it, don't you? I said quietly. That unsettled him, just enough. Feel what? He asked, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. I stepped forward slightly, not aggressive, just certain. That something doesn't add up. The room was completely silent now, no one interrupting, no one dismissing it, because deep down, they all felt it, that small crack in the story they had believed their entire lives. I could break it right there, shatter everything, but I didn't, because I remembered his words, weapon or foundation. And this wasn't about destroying them. It was about something else, something harder. You don't need to know everything right now, I said finally. That immediately triggered a reaction. Excuse me? You don't get to decide that. I do, I said calmly. And that was the difference. No anger, no emotion, just truth. I'm not here to fight you, and I'm not here to take anything from you. That confused them even more, because that's exactly what they expected. That's exactly what you've done, my uncle said coldly. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. What I've done is accepted what was given to me. A small pause. And now I'm deciding what happens next. That's the part they didn't like. Not at all. Because control, that's what they were losing. Daniel stepped forward now, his eyes locked on mine. And that exactly means for us. That question mattered, because now they were asking, not demanding, not assuming, asking. And that changed everything. I took a slow breath, because this was the moment, the real one, the one that would define everything moving forward. It means, I said carefully, that nothing changes unless you make it change. They didn't understand, not fully. I could see it. So I explained. You still have your properties, I said, looking at my uncle. Your assets, I added, glancing at my aunt. Your shares, I finished, looking at Daniel. I'm not taking any of that away. That hit them harder than any threat could have, because they expected the opposite. They expected loss. They expected revenge. They expected me to become exactly what they would have been in my place. But I wasn't, and that confused them more than anything. "Then what do you want?" my aunt asked slowly. There it was, the real question, and for the first time, it wasn't filled with entitlement. It was filled with uncertainty. I looked at her, then at all of them, and answered honestly, "I want the truth to stop being a weapon." They didn't respond, didn't move, because that wasn't what they expected to hear. "I want this family to stop pretending things that aren't real, and I want respect where it should have been all along." My voice didn't rise, didn't break, it stayed steady, because this wasn't emotion, this was clarity. And if that can't happen, a small pause, then nothing else matters anyway. Silence, deep, unavoidable, because now they had a choice too, not just me. And for the first time in my life, we weren't standing in the same roles anymore. They weren't above me, and I wasn't beneath them. We were standing face to face, equal, and they didn't know how to handle that. Daniel was the first to look away, just for a second, but it was enough, because that confidence he had earlier, it was gone, replaced with something else, something quieter, something real. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over, not even close. But it was different now, because the power wasn't just in the money, it was in the truth, and what we chose to do with it. No one spoke for a long time after that, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence, because silence, I realized, isn't always empty. Sometimes it's where things start to shift. My aunt was the first to sit down, slowly, not out of defeat, but because something in her had changed, not softened, not yet, but unsettled. "You're asking for respect," she said finally, her voice quieter than before. I didn't react to the tone, because I understood what she meant. From her perspective, I had just taken everything, turned their world upside down. "And from my perspective," I replied calmly, "I've been asking for that my entire life." That landed, not loudly, but deeply, because it wasn't an argument, it was a fact. My uncle exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "This is a lot," he muttered. And for the first time, he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. Daniel hadn't moved much, still standing, still watching me, but differently now. Less like an opponent, more like someone trying to understand the rules of a game that had suddenly changed. "You said you found something," he said after a moment. "Something about your mother." I met his gaze. "I did." "Then say it," he pushed, but his voice lacked the sharp edge it had before. I thought about it, really thought about it, because this was the line, the one I had been standing on since I walked into that room. Reveal everything or hold it, not out of fear, but of purpose. "You don't need the full truth right now," I said. A small flicker of frustration crossed his face. "There you go again. But you do need to understand one thing," I added gently. That stopped him, because there was something in my tone now, something final. "My mother was never beneath this family," I said. My eyes moved to my aunt. "Not then." Then to my uncle. "Not ever." And finally back to Daniel. "And neither am I." No anger, no accusation, just truth. And somehow that made it harder to argue against. Because what do you say to something that simple, that direct, that real? My aunt looked away first, not dramatically, just a quiet shift, like she didn't have an immediate response. And that alone, that was new. "I didn't know," she said after a moment. Soft, almost defensive, but not in the way I expected. "I didn't know any of this." I believed her. Not completely, but enough. Because the truth is, people don't always question what benefits them. And for years, this version of reality had worked in their favor. So they never looked deeper, never asked harder questions. "Maybe you didn't," I said, and I meant it. That didn't excuse everything, but it explained part of it. My uncle leaned back slightly, his expression distant. "If what you're saying is true," he began slowly, "then everything we thought we knew about this family—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to, because we all knew how it ended. Was wrong. Daniel finally sat down. That was the moment I noticed it. Not the words, not the silence. That. Because Daniel never sat in situations like this. He stood, he controlled, he dominated the space. But now, he was adjusting, adapting, trying to keep up. "What happens now?" he asked. Not challenging, not mocking, just asking. And that question, it meant everything. Because now, they weren't resisting anymore. They were listening. I took a slow breath, looked around the room, and answered honestly. Now, we stopped pretending. That hung there for a moment. "What does that actually mean?" my aunt asked quietly. "It means we don't rewrite the past to make it comfortable. We don't ignore what happened just because it's easier." I paused, then added, "And we don't treat people like they don't belong when they do." That last part wasn't just for them. It was for me, for every version of me that sat quietly in rooms like this, feeling invisible. My uncle nodded slowly, not in agreement, not fully, but in understanding. "That's not going to be easy," he said. "I know," I replied, "but it's necessary." Another silence, but this one felt different. Less tense, more reflective, because now this wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about rebuilding something that had been broken for a long time, and that takes time, effort, willingness, none of which I could force. I stepped back slightly, not retreating, just giving space. Because this wasn't something that would resolve in one conversation, or one day, or even 1 year, but it could start here, if they let it. "I'm not your enemy," I said finally. That caught their attention again, because I think part of them still expected that, still believed it. I never was. My voice stayed calm, steady. I just refused to stay invisible. No one argued with that. No one could, because they knew it was true, even if they didn't want to admit it out loud. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his expression, no superiority, just thought. "You're different," he said. I didn't smile, didn't react much at all. "Maybe I always was," I replied, and that was the truth. This wasn't a change, not really. It was a reveal of who I had been all along, just finally seen. The room settled after that, not resolved, not perfect, but quieter, more honest. And as I stood there looking at all of them, I realized something important. This wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about breaking a pattern, ending something that had been repeating for generations, and choosing something better, something real, even if it was harder, even if it took time. I stepped back slightly toward the window, the fading light stretching across the room. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something I didn't expect. Peace. Not complete, not permanent, but real. Because for once, I wasn't reacting to the past. I was shaping what came next. And that I could take away. The room felt impossibly quiet after that. Not peaceful, just heavy. Like every word he had spoken was still hanging in the air, pressing down on me from all sides. I didn't move. I couldn't, because my entire life had just been rewritten in a matter of minutes. I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't the mistake. I was the first bloodline, the one that came before everything else. And yet, I had been treated like I didn't belong at all. My chest tightened as that realization settled deeper, because it wasn't just about what they did, it was about what he didn't do. He knew. All those years, he knew, and still he chose silence. The recorder crackled softly again, pulling me back. And now you're wondering why I waited. I let out a slow breath. Of course he knew. Of course he anticipated that question, because how could I not ask it? You deserve that answer. His voice was steady now, not defensive, just honest. I didn't tell the truth sooner because the truth at the time would have destroyed everything. I frowned slightly, my eyes fixed on the recorder. Destroyed everything? What did that even mean? The businesses, the partnerships, the people tied to the name I built. His tone shifted slightly, more calculated now. The foundation of it all was fragile in ways no one else could see. I felt a quiet frustration rise in my chest, because to him it sounded like justification, like he was choosing the empire over the truth, over me. I convinced myself that if I waited, if I secured everything first, then I could make it right later. A pause. Heavy. Regretful. But later always comes with a cost. I looked down at my hands, because I was that cost. My entire childhood, every moment of feeling like I didn't belong, that was the price of his decision. And by the time I realized what it had done to you, his voice softened again. I had already lost the chance to fix it the right way. I swallowed hard, because I understood that. Not completely, but enough. There are some things in life that once they pass a certain point, you can't undo them. You can only try to make up for them. And sometimes that's not enough. I watched you become someone this family didn't deserve. That line caught me off guard, because it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like respect. You didn't grow bitter. A pause. You didn't become cruel. Another. You remained kind even when no one showed you kindness. My chest tightened again, because that wasn't something I had ever thought about. Not like that. To me, I was just surviving, getting through things the only way I knew how. But to him, it meant something more. And that is why I knew when the time came, you were the only one I could trust with the truth. The word trust echoed in my mind, because that was something I had never felt from him before. Not openly, not clearly, and now it was the foundation of everything he left behind. The others, his voice shifted again. Colder now. Not emotional, just factual. They were raised inside the comfort of what I built. They expect it, depend on it, and would destroy each other to keep it. Images flashed in my mind. The tension in that room, the way they looked at me, the way they reacted the moment things didn't go their way. He wasn't wrong. They don't value it. They control it. A subtle difference, but a powerful one. And if I had left everything to them, he paused, it wouldn't last. That felt true in a way I couldn't explain because I had seen it, even before all of this. The entitlement, the competition, the quiet greed beneath their polished appearances. They would tear it apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained but resentment and loss. I exhaled slowly, because now I understood something else. This wasn't just about fixing the past, it was about protecting the future. And you, his voice softened once more, you would never do that. I closed my eyes briefly, because I didn't know if I believed that. Not fully, not yet, because I had never been in a position like this before. I had never held this kind of power, and power changes people, or at least reveals who they really are. I am not asking you to forgive me. That made my eyes open again, because I expected that, some kind of apology wrapped in a request for forgiveness. But this was different. I don't deserve that. The honesty in that sentence felt final, like he wasn't trying to clean anything up, just tell the truth. I am asking you to understand. I let that sit for a moment, because understanding, that's harder than forgiveness. It means seeing both sides, accepting things that don't sit right, carrying truths that don't feel fair. And more importantly, his voice steadied again, I'm asking you to decide what happens next. That pulled me back completely, because suddenly this wasn't about him anymore. This wasn't about the past. This was about me. What happens next? The truth you now hold has the power to change everything. My fingers tightened slightly, because I knew what he meant. If I revealed this, if I told them what I had just learned, it would shatter everything they believed about themselves, about the family, about their place in it. And when they come to you, his tone darkened slightly, they will not come with understanding. I thought about Daniel, that look in his eyes, that smile. He was right. They will come with anger, with entitlement, with demands. Every word felt accurate, predictable, almost inevitable. And in that moment, a pause, you will have a choice. I leaned forward slightly, because I knew this part mattered, more than anything else. You can use this truth as a weapon. My chest tightened. Or you can use it as a foundation. That hit deeper than I expected, because both options were real, both were possible. And the difference between those two choices, his voice dropped slightly, will define the kind of legacy you create. Legacy, that word again. But now it meant something completely different. Not inheritance, not wealth, not status. Something deeper, something lasting. The recording softened as he spoke his final words. I gave you everything, not so you could take from them. A breath. But so you could become something they never were. The tape clicked. And just like that, it ended. Silence filled the room again. But this time it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, just still. I stood there for a long moment, not moving, not thinking, just absorbing everything. Because now I wasn't just holding an inheritance, I was holding the truth, the kind of truth that could destroy a family or rebuild it. And for the first time in my life, the choice wasn't being made for me. It was mine, completely mine. I looked around the room again, at the documents, the photographs, the life he had hidden. And slowly, I understood something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because now, they were going to come for me. And when they did, I had to be ready. The days that followed didn't feel real at first. Not because everything changed overnight, but because it didn't. And that, somehow, was more surprising. There were no dramatic confrontations, no legal battles, no sudden attempts to challenge the will. At least, not immediately. Instead, there was distance, careful conversations, measured interactions, like everyone was walking on ground that hadn't fully settled yet. And in a way, we were. Because when the foundation of a family shifts, you don't rebuild it in a day. You learn how to stand again first. I stayed at the estate, not because I had to, but because I chose to. The condition in the will required it, yes, but more than that, it felt right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't visiting that place as an outsider. I was living in it, walking through halls that once felt cold and distant, and slowly making them feel like something else. Not home, not yet, but something closer than they had ever been before. I spent time going through the archive, not all at once, not in some obsessive rush, but piece by piece, letting each part settle before moving to the next. And the more I uncovered, the clearer everything became. Not just the truth about my mother, but the truth about him. My grandfather wasn't a simple man. He wasn't just cold or distant or calculated. He was complicated, flawed. Someone who built something massive while losing pieces of himself along the way. And in the end, he tried to put those pieces back together. Too late, maybe, but sincerely. And that mattered more than I thought it would. I visited my mother a few days later. I didn't tell her everything right away, not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed to see something first. I needed to see her reaction without influence, without preparation, just truth. We sat together in the quiet of her living room, the same space I had known my entire life. Simple, warm, nothing like the estate. And yet, it felt more real than anything else. "There's something I need to ask you," I said gently. She looked at me, careful, like she already knew this wasn't a normal conversation. "What is it?" I held her gaze. "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" The question hung between us, heavy, unavoidable. And for a moment, she didn't answer. She just looked down, her hands resting quietly in her lap. "I was waiting for that question," she said softly. My chest tightened slightly. "Then answer it." She took a slow breath, and when she looked back at me, there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not guilt, just honesty. Because it wasn't my truth to give. That caught me off guard. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "that some truths don't just belong to one person." I frowned slightly. "That's not fair," I said. "No," she agreed quietly, "it's not." Silence settled between us for a moment. "But it was the choice I made," she continued, "because I knew what would happen if it came out the wrong way. I thought about that, about the family, about everything I had just experienced, and slowly I understood. Not completely, but enough. You protected them," I said quietly. She shook her head slightly. "No," she replied, "I protected you." That surprised me. "How?" "Because letting you grow up without carrying something that heavy, without feeling like you had to prove something or fight for something before you were ready." I let that sit for a moment, because part of me wanted to argue, wanted to say it didn't feel like protection. It felt like silence, like absence, like being left alone. But another part of me, the part that had just uncovered everything, understood what she meant. "You knew he would tell me," I said quietly. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, that's simple. That's certain." "And if he didn't?" I asked quietly. Her expression softened slightly. "Then I would have," she said. And I believed her. Not because she said it, but because I could feel it. in the way she spoke, in the way she carried herself, in everything I had come to understand about her. We sat in silence after that, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was complete, like something that had been missing had finally found its place. "I'm proud of you," she said after a while. The words caught me off guard because I'd heard them recently from him, and now from her. And somehow they felt different, but equally important. "For what?" I asked quietly. "For not letting this change who you are," she said. I looked down for a moment because the truth was I didn't know if it had. Not fully, not yet. But I knew one thing. I hadn't let it make me someone I wasn't. And maybe that was enough. I returned to the estate later that evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property, and for the first time, it didn't feel cold. It didn't feel distant. It just felt quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. I stood there for a moment, looking at everything that once felt so far out of reach, and realized something simple. This wasn't the reward, the money, the estate, the inheritance. That wasn't the point. The point was the truth, the clarity, the understanding of where I came from and who I was. Everything else, that was just responsibility, and I was ready for it. Not because I had all the answers, but because I finally understood the question, who am I when I have the power to choose? And for the first time in my life, I had an answer. I turned toward the house, toward whatever came next, and walked forward, not as the forgotten one, not as the outsider, but as someone who finally knew exactly where they stood, and more importantly, exactly who they were.